Hey guys, today I'm going to make a video on how to put together our V1 stock. This one is the stock that was in our Ace limited edition kit. We are now available on the website. We have a black option, which will come fully assembled and painted, ready to go on your goat gun. Or if you are wanting to do your own color scheme, similar to this one, we are going to release a kit where you can build your own. So it'll come gray like this. Then you can, it won't be assembled. You can go through and paint it the colors that you'd like, and then you'll have to assemble it yourself. So that's what this video is going to be, to show you how these stocks are put together, and decide if this is something you want to undertake or not. I think it's rewarding once you finish it, but I will say it is pretty tedious and kind of annoying, but I'll show you how it goes together. So some tools that you'll need. So the kit will come with, so this is what the kit will come with. It'll come with the main body. It'll come with the butt pad that you'll have to glue on, and then it will come with the lever, and it will also come with 2 detents to make it work, because there's a good chance you might break one. This rod right here, is the one that will go through and actually push down the detent, and then this longer rod is what locks it into place. This one will need to be cut, so you will need a couple tools, and then the spring to hold it in place. So that's everything that the kit's going to come with, and I'm going to show you how it all goes together. Okay, so before we get into the actual installation, I'm going to go over a couple tools that are, I won't say required. Some of them are required, but some of them are, they make it a lot easier. So in order to cut down, you'll see later in the video, in order to cut down one of those steel rods, you will need some angle cuts. I like these ones a lot because they come to a very sharp point. Some of the bigger ones, like these ones, they kind of indent in there, and you'll see why these are not going to be the best for the application, but anything that comes to a very sharp cutting edge is going to be the best. So I'd recommend some of those. You might need a small file, you might not. It just kind of depends on your gun and how it all fits. I'll show you what I'll use these screwdrivers for later. You don't necessarily need a screwdriver, but something small that you can push the spring down with. And then you will need some super glue. I also would highly recommend one of these precision nozzles. You can find them on Amazon. All this stuff you can find on Amazon. But this is going to help a lot, and you'll see why. Those are the tools that you'll need. And I mean, there's ways around it if you don't use those tools, but I would highly recommend them. Okay, let's get into the install. Okay, so the first step, well, your very first step is going to be painting it. So paint it the color of your choice. This one's all black, but what I would recommend is take your time on this. Don't rush it. So what I do with these is I paint all the parts, and I will let them sit for a week before I assemble it, just to make sure the paint is completely cured. It's not sticky at all, because things fit very tightly on this. It had to be, there's not much clearance on everything. Unfortunately, we had to do that to get this to function the way that it did. And you'll see as we go on with the video that it's very tight and very tedious. I would let it sit for a week. I also would not paint it too thick. Your coat's too thick. So take your time, do very thin coats going over this, and don't rush the process. So in order to put this lever on, what I have found the best thing to do is to take the side. So these levers, one side has this side right here has some little indentations, the female side, and then the male side has the portions that'll go into it. So this will need to be put on the gun, and then these need to be glued together. We tried to do it with other versions without using glue, but nothing would hold together. So as you can see here on the stock, this little spot right here, there's an indentation on the lever right there, if you can see it. So that indentation needs to go over that pin right there. And that's the hinge point of this. So what I do is take the side that has the holes in it and I will push it in. What I do is try and, hopefully you can see this, I'll kind of come in on it at this angle and kind of snap it up into place. So I'll get this bottom part down into that slot that it'll ride in, like this. And then I'll kind of push it in and you can kind of feel it click once it goes in. So once you feel it click, and sometimes some go easier and some go harder. To help it go on, I would push right here where that pin is gonna be and then kind of wiggle the actual lever on the stock like this, just to make sure it fully gets set. And then you can look down it and just make sure that it's, you know, it sits in there tight and flush. And then what I will do is push this lever all the way down so that I know where it is when putting the other side on. So now that that's in, I'll flip it over and you can see those holes down in there. That's where I'm gonna put some super glue. That's what this fine applicator tip is for, if I can get it to focus. But yeah, that won't focus. But you can get these on Amazon. I think I got like a 200 pack for $3 or something like that. You just look up, you know, fine super glue applicators. That way I'll put this on my super glue and it gives me real fine control at the tip. So I'll put 2 little drops in here and just barely put any in there, because if you put too much in there and it squeezes out over the edges, the lever's gonna lock up and it's not gonna be able to turn. So I'll actually get it down in there first. And just 2 tiny dabs in there. And if you get too much up around the edges here, you can see a little bit came up around the edges. If you get too much, you can get a Q-tip and dab that out. You just don't want it to squeeze out and get glue between the actual lever and the stock, because it'll seize up on you. So now this one, you do the same thing as the other side. You kind of put it in and snap it up and you'll feel these tabs snap in on there. This side goes in easier than the other side. Sometimes, I guess I shouldn't say that, but most of the time it goes in easier. Now that I said that, it's probably not gonna. But you just kind of gotta feel it. Get it to snap together, make sure they're tight, both in those grooves. And it's, what I'll do to kind of make sure it's in there is I'll push down on both sides of the lever at the same time. So I'll pinch right here where they hinge at, and I'll just kind of wiggle both sides just to make sure that I'm sliding on that hinge point properly. But keep pressure because the glue's not set yet, so it will come apart. But just to make sure that it's on there. So this one's set on there, and you can look down, make sure that there's not a gap. There we go. Get it to focus. Right down in here. Make sure it's in there tight. And then what I'll do is I'll make sure it's on there tight, and then make sure both levers are, you know, linked up together. Make sure they're in the same spot. And then I'll let the glue sit there and dry for a couple minutes is all. And then I'll come back in 2 minutes. And again, I'll push on both sides, pinching right here, and then I'll move it down. So now it's in this position, and then I'll let it sit for 2 more minutes, and then I'll move it up again, just to make sure that if there is any residual glue that did seep out over the edges, that it's not able to set up and glue to the actual stock. So I'll just make sure while that glue is setting up, just make sure these didn't stick together and that they can freely move. So that's it for step 1, getting that glued in there. Honestly, I think that's the hardest part of all of it. That is the most frustrating, most annoying part. Take your time on that. Make sure, you know, don't push too hard. If something's not kind of wanting to go, just don't push too hard because you'll break stuff. Just make sure you're taking your time on that portion. I'm not gonna lie, it is frustrating. Putting these stocks together is not fun at all. So we'll see how long I offer until I get sick of putting them together. But that's step one. Now, once that's on there, I will let that glue dry overnight. I'll let it sit overnight. So this is step one, and then I'll do step two the next day. If we come back, this is one that I glued up a couple days ago. So the glue has had time to set up. So that lever is fully dry in there. And the nice part is now it is pinned together. So when I push on this back side, it'll move. So it's double-sided. Do it on this side. It'll move. What I would recommend, if you're playing with it a bunch, I'd recommend to push on both sides at the same time. Just because I have had some that I just sat and played with it and pushed and pushed and pushed. And it did break out those little locking pins that hold the lever together. It is pretty strong, but just something to be aware of. You put a lot of work into putting this together. You don't really want it to break. So just be careful with that. Okay, so for step two, get the super glue out of the way. Step two, what we're going to need is one of these detents, one of these pins right here, and one of these locking pins, and a spring. So this is what we're going to need to get the stock fully functional. First thing to do is get this detent, and this part, again, requires patience. This whole process requires patience, but you're going to slide this detent in, and this hole right there, just trying to focus on the background, that hole right there is where this pin is going to need to slide through, and that's actually going to lock it in the stock. Now this hole is barely undersized to the pin, so that as you're pushing it in, it will actually push some of the plastic out of here in order to make this a really tight fit so this pin doesn't slide out. So it is going to be hard to get in there because it is going to push some plastic out of the way. So what I'll do is line it up right there to where I can see the hole, just right through there. And then I'll take my pin and try and slide it in, get it started so that I know it's going in that actual hole. So I think I felt it right there, kind of started. And then I'll push it in. Sometimes I can push it in with my fingernail. Kind of wiggle it just to get it to go in. Sometimes it won't go though. So what I'll do is just take some sort of hard object. Sometimes I'll just take the backs of these and just push it down. But be careful with this, because if it's not going easily, somewhat easily, and if you're having to push really, really hard, the odds are it's not lined up and it's going to break something. Another thing to be aware of is on the back side, make sure that hole is lined up with that slot, because if it's too high up or too low, when you push through, that's going to come out the other side and it's going to try and break some of that plastic. So line it up and just, this one kind of seems like it doesn't want to go. It's going, but it's kind of fighting me. So just be careful. Just barely push it through. You don't want to push too hard. This one might be fighting me too hard. So sometimes what I'll do, just ahead of time before I put it in, if it's fighting me like that, I'll push it through outside of the gun just to make sure it clears. Just to kind of push that plastic out of the way first. So now this one. So it did push out some plastic right there. So now it should push through a little bit easier on the gun. That's good though. I want it to be tight so that pin stays locked in. So now, once it's started, it slides through fairly easy like that. So maybe I'd just recommend, before you even put that detent in, try and, slide your pin through just to push that plastic out of the way first to get that clearance. So now that pin's in, I'll line it up to where it overhangs both sides of the lever so that the lever will actually, when you push the lever down, it'll push that detent down. So the next step is to put the spring in. On these springs, they're just barely too long, so I actually have to cut off just almost one full coil, just barely under one full coil. The springs will come pre-cut. I'll go through and cut all the springs, so you don't have to worry about that. But they will need to be cut a little. I will take the cut end. So this is the cut end right here. Yeah, there we go, get it to focus. I'll take the cut end and I'll put that in first. I think it'll just help with this pin down here. So before I put that in, this other pin right here will slide in. What I will do is I'll slide it in part way, just get it started. I'll slide it through here and have it slide through the detent, but not far enough that I can't get the spring in. Let me pull it out. So I'll slide it in about that far. So then I can get the spring in and it's easier just to push that pin through. One thing to note on these pins, so this pin right here, we're gonna cut it flush right here so it'll be to the right size. Don't try and cut this pin. I mean, you can, but this pin right here is galvanized steel, cuts fairly easy. This is hardened steel. It will just damage your side cuts. So unless you have some really good side cuts, you can cut this. That is, I mean, I do cut this with side cuts, but it will damage them. So just be aware of that. Next step is to take the spring, push it in. So now this is what I use these screwdrivers for. I use a really small screwdriver to push the spring down so that I can push this pin in. So it's kind of hard because you need to push the spring down, but then as you're pushing this pin in, you need to kind of let up with the screwdriver. That's why I have a Phillips and a flathead. So I'll get the Phillips to push it all the way down, and then I'll use this fine flathead to kind of go off to the side of the spring to push it down all the way until I can get that pin through. So that part is a little tricky, but I think if you've made it this far with the other stuff, you should be fine. I think compared to the other stuff, this is probably the easiest part. So then I'll push that all the way through. So that's holding the spring in. And then what I'll do is, and I usually do this over a garbage can, because as you cut this, this rod is going to go shooting across the room. So just to be safe, I'll do it, down in a contained area so I know where it goes and it doesn't hit myself or anyone else. But for the video, we're going to do it right here and launch it across the room. There's nobody over there to get hurt. But what I will do is I'll line this up flush with it, and then I'll put pressure with my thumb on the actual stock, on this plastic right here. Because this plastic, as you cut these, especially if your side cuts aren't perfectly lined up, like these aren't really perfectly lined up, they won't cause a clean cut, and the shock from the actual cut can crack this plastic part. So I'll keep pressure on it just to make sure that it doesn't. And again, this is why I really recommend some really precision side cuts. But I'll cut it up here flush, make sure I'm not cutting into that other pin, get it up there, give it a nice flush cut, and then I'll do the same thing on this side. I'll use this thumb to hold pressure just so that the shock from the cut doesn't break my plastic. Get it in there flush and cut it like that. So now you're flush like that. This other pin's going to work the lever. So now as I push the lever down, it'll move that detent, and then the spring will push it back up. So that right there is fully functional. Again, if you're playing with it a bunch, I would push both sides of the lever. You're just going to have more strength doing that, but it will work. I mean, don't be scared to push one side and have the other one move. That's what it's designed to do. Okay, so now, once I have it fully put together, other than my butt pad, what I will do is I will fit it up to my gun. So now this part is difficult because every single buffer tube is just a little bit different. So this is why I fit this up before I put the butt pad on. So I'll put it on the buffer tube and then pull down on these pins. I'll have to push them this way, but you need to grab both sides and pull down and just barely clear the buffer tube. So that one fit perfect. And most of these should. I spent a lot of time getting that detent the perfect size. However, some of the buffer tubes are going to fit differently, so it may need a little bit of adjustment. So what you want it to do is just barely, I mean, you'll feel resistance as you push it on, push these down. You'll feel a little bit of resistance. If you feel too much, don't keep pushing, because you will actually chip out this portion of the plastic right here. If you push down too hard, this will crack. That's the downside to the room that we had to work with on this. To make this look like, you know, to scale look on this design, we had hardly any room to work with the size of this detent down here. If we had more room to work with, we could have used a different spring and had more ability, you know, more flexibility down there. But with that small space that we had, that detent's got to be the perfect size, that spring has to be the perfect size, and it can just barely clear that buffer tube. So you want a little bit of resistance as you push down, just barely feel it, and then it'll slide over. And then that way the spring has enough travel to push up and have these lock into the holes. Now, if it doesn't fit, so some of these detents with buffer tubes, as you're trying to push down, it just won't clear. And if to get it to clear, you got to push so hard that you're going to push and those are going to break. If that is the case, the reason we have not put the butt pad on yet is because I will take this file and then I will hit that detent right there. Just skim it across the top with that file. Just barely. And like I said, this is such a tight fitting part that I would just barely kiss a tiny bit off the tip of it and then try and fit it again. And if it's still tight, just barely kiss another one and try and fit it in. Because if you go too much on it to where it clears onto the buffer tube too easily, then that detent, when the lever comes back up, will not lock into those holes. On some of them, as you do push down, if it does struggle to lock in, you can push this up with your thumb. The spring doesn't have quite enough force to fully return it to the top on some of them, so you should be able to get it to lock in like that. But hopefully, you can get it sized perfectly to where you don't have any issues with that. So now that we have verified this fits our gun, everything's lined up perfect, here comes the easiest part. So if you've made it this far, you are in good shape. So the last step is to take your super glue again, and I've taken the fine tip nozzle off because I don't need it anymore. And on these little pins right here, I'll just put a tiny bit of glue, and you don't need hardly any, just barely a little bit on top of each of those. And then I can take my butt pad, which has the holes for those to line up. I'll line them up, push it on, make sure it's on there nice and tight, and I'll hold it for just a little bit as that glue sets up to hold it on there. Again, you don't want to put too much because it'll squeeze out over the edges. Both times you need to use glue on this process, less is definitely more. So, and then once it sets up, holds on there tight, that is your finished product. So now you've got a fully functional stock. Slide it on here, pull down on those pins. Again, make sure you pull down even. Get it on there, and it'll lock into place. Now you push one side and both sides move. So, pretty cool design. I really like these stocks. I wish they were easier to assemble. Like I said, this may be something that ends up being another limited edition part because I get so frustrated putting them together. And of a lot of 35 stocks that I make, I'll probably break 5 of them trying to assemble these. So 5 of them will go straight into the garbage. It's always this spot right here that I break. I'll break that out. So like I said, throughout this whole process, that's why I put this video together, is just as a nice aid for you guys to have for assembling your own. But the number one thing I can recommend is take your time. Don't try and rush this. Take your time with the whole process. Allow yourself with enough time to paint it. Let it sit for, I would recommend a week. Glue in your lever, and then I'd recommend letting that sit for 24 hours before you go to the final step. But I think it's very rewarding if you do want to make your own. Once you do have one fully put together, it is very rewarding because you do know the complexity of it and how hard it was to put together. But for those of you that don't don't want to undertake that, you don't want to go through all that, you can buy the black ones. The black ones will come fully assembled, ready to go on your goat gun. And then if you want to paint your own, you can get the unpainted version and do your own custom paint job. Anyway, that's it for this video. I know it's a long one, but I wanted to make sure I was very vivid on all the different steps to answer any questions that you guys have. If you do have any more questions, don't be afraid to send me an email. I'll get back to it as soon as I can and try and help you with any issues that you're having. Thanks for all the support, guys. I think you guys are really going to enjoy this one. This was a long design in the process, so I'm really happy that it's finished and you guys are able to get your hands on them. We'll catch you on the next video. Thanks, guys.